The Mystery in the Desert. The Mystery in the Desert. Adrienne Selenis was just 19 years old when she went missing student at Gateway Community College in Maricopa County, Arizona. She had dreams of becoming a journalist, looking to use her love of movies and reading to craft a future in storytelling. But Adrienne's real-life story was tragically cut short, her life ending in a way that seems senseless, and to this day remains a mystery. On the night of June 14th of 2013, Adrienne and her roommates were hosting a party at their apartment. While most people there were having a good time, Adrienne wasn't, as she watched across the room with her boyfriend, Francisco Arteaga, chattered it up with several other girls. Francisco had been Adrienne's first love. Their dating history went all the way back to the 8th grade. So, had a long history of many ups and downs, they decided to leave the party together around 2:30 a.m. to talk things over at Francisco's place away from all the noise, but it didn't end with a reconciliation. And so he ended up driving her back home around 3 a.m., and that's where, according to him, their night ended. Adrienne's story didn't stop there at around 3:30 a.m. One of her roommates caught a glimpse of her leaving the apartment once again. This time Adrienne was carrying an overnight bag and her face determined. She couldn't stop thinking about her boyfriend and looking to make things right. She decided to head back to his place. She hopped in her car, then at exactly 3:45 a.m., a call came into the Tempe police station describing a car driving erratically. This vehicle hit the median near Ash Avenue in Rio Salado Parkway. The driver was Adrienne. She drove away with 2 blown-out tires. The car drove away, even though it had 2 damaged tires. She hobbled that car to a nearby convenience store where a phone record showed that between 4:10 a.m. and 4:45, she called Francisco 11 times, desperate to reach him. She texts letting him know she's on her way, but Adrienne never makes it. The last known communication from her is with a cab driver arranging a pickup when the driver arrives. Adrienne isn't there. Her phone is then turned off at 5:07 a.m., and from that moment on, she's gone. Adrienne's father, Rick, was supposed to hang out with her on Father's Day on June 16th, but he couldn't reach her, and she never reached out to him. He drove into town to look for his gut, letting him know that something was horribly wrong. It was then that he spotted her car still at that convenience store, but there was no sign of his daughter. That's when he reached out to police, who conducted a thorough search for the young woman. They combed through every inch of Tempe, but only came up empty-handed. They questioned everyone: Francisco, the cab driver, people at the party, but no one has ever officially been a suspect. What you didn't answer? I was asleep. My phone was on silent, or I didn't hear it. It was, I was asleep. I was already at my house. I was already asleep. Then, nearly 2 months later, on August 6th, there was a break in the case, only it wasn't a good one, in the desert near Addy Junction. Amon spotted some vultures circling above his property. When he investigated there, he found human remains. The body had been exposed to the elements, the desert, heat, and rains, taking their toll. But DNA did confirm that their remains belonged to Adrienne Selenis. The autopsy was unfortunately inconclusive. The medical examiner was unable to determine a cause of death, or even a manner of death. What happened? Adrienne that night remains a mystery. But the police are certain of one thing: this was no accident. Somebody moved her body, likely dumping it in a remote location. The storm may have carried her remains to where they were finally discovered. It's likely this was all some sort of opportunistic killing, that someone spotted her in that parking lot, offered her a ride she so desperately needed, and she took it. Was it someone she knew? Possibly, though it could have been a total stranger as well. Regardless, whoever is responsible for Adrienne's dad is still out there, and until they are found, the mystery of what happened her will continue to haunt this case and all those who knew. The vanishing of Joshua Guo, another college, another party, and now another vanishing, this time over in Minnesota at St. John's University, on the night of November 9th of 2002. 20-year-old poli-sci major Joshua Guimon was hanging out at a casual dorm party in the Metan Court building playing poker with friends. He had a good amount of drink, something like 7 to 12 brews, but he didn't seem overly intoxicated according. To his boys, however, he did pull an Irish excitate around 11:45 p.m. He just quietly slipped out of the gathering without a word. It was a short walk back to his dorm in St. Maur, 3 minutes. Yet Joshua never made it. Nobody at the party gave Joshua's absence much thought. Perhaps he had gone to use the bathroom, or maybe he'd gone back to his dorm to crash for the night, in other words. It wasn't a big deal that he was gone, there was no reason to worry, but the following afternoon when he failed to show up for a mock trial, hosted by the school's pre-law society. While people started to worry, my friends called around to one another, and no one had seen him. No one at his dorm had witnessed him walking around. They then called Josh's mom, Tosi, if she had heard from him, but she hadn't. They reached out to campus security, who in turn reached out to the local authorities. Josh's car was found on campus, so he hadn't driven off anywhere. I look at his computer showed that he'd played some music between 11:50 and 12:30 a.m. That night he went missing, and it showed that some tracks were skipped, which implied someone was there skipping them. Presumably, Josh, though it's impossible to know. For sure police interviewed everyone from that gathering and search parties combed the campus, diving into the vast wooded grounds surrounding the university and searching the icy waters of nearby lakes. Investigators theorized that perhaps Joshua had stumbled drunk and fallen into the freezing depths of Stump Lake. It seemed plausible because his route home would have taken him over the lake's bridge, but nobody ever surfaced. There were no clues in the water, and the theory began to unravel. At first, authorities suggested Josh had been drinking and wandered into a lake or marsh, but dive teams searched. The water on the campus, the lakes were lowered and dragged. Josh never turned up, and people close to him never thought. The story was that simple. But then came a twist. Bloodhounds brought to the scene track Joshua sent to the bridge near Stump Lake. The problem was they were brought in a month after the disappearance, which is an ideal when trying to follow someone. The canine suggested, though, that he was there, that if he wasn't in the waters below, well, maybe he had been taken by somebody. Further investigations reveal that Joshua's computer back in his dorm room had been mysteriously tampered with after his disappearance. The room was not sealed off like a crime scene, so really anyone could have gained access here. And somebody had deleted files, wiped browser data, and left behind clues that pointed to something far darker. See, Joshua had been exploring an online world, engaging in conversations with unknown men using a false female persona in picture. This is a fact, and maybe he'd arranged to meet somebody that night, or had he crossed paths with an online stranger on that bridge. Worth noting is that around the same time Joshua disappeared, the 3 other young men in nearby towns around his age also vanished, each under mysterious and unsettling circumstances. Often they had been out drinking, some were found drowned, others, like Joshua, were never found at all. Was this just a coincidence, or are they all tied together in some sort of way? To this day, Joshua remains missing. No body, no definitive answers. His case is haunted by a trail of dead ends, strange coincidences, and chilling possibilities. And did he actually fall into the cold waters of Stump Lake? His body lost forever in the murky depths, or was he taken, conducted by someone who'd done this several times? The traumatic case of the Klaus family in the summer of 1980, Dean and Tina Klaus were just beginning a new chapter of their lives. Young and in love, and now parents. To baby Holly Marie, they left their hometown in New Smyrna Beach, Florida, and moved to Louisville, Texas. Will be the promise of a better future. Dean and adept Cabinet Mac had dreams of building a stable life for his family in the booming construction industry of the Dallas-Fort Worth area. But by October that year, well, something went terribly wrong. The Clouds family disappeared, without a trace, leaving their loved ones back in Florida in anguish and confusion. The months passed without a word from the couple. Were they simply starting a new life, or had something far more sinister happened? Wouldn't be until January of 1981 that the horrifying truth began to finally emerge. It was a grim day when a dog wandered into the swampy woodlands north of Houston, Texas, and returned to its owner with something horrifying clutched in his jaws, a human arm. This gruesome discovery sparked a search that would reveal two decomposing bodies near Wallaceville Road. Their identities, however, remain a mystery. For decades, the male found, partially skeletonized, showed signs of brutal violence. He had been bound and gagged, and his skull showed evidence of being beaten to death. And just feet away, a female body was discovered, strangled. Both have been dead for months. They remains too decayed to offer many clues. The victims, soon dubbed the Harris County Dew, were buried in anonymous graves, their identities and stories swallowed by time back and forth. Florida, the Clouds, and Lynn families were desperate for answers, and it had been months since they last heard from Dean Tina, or Baby Holly, by 1981. Dean's mother, Donna, reported the young family missing yet. Police did little. They believe Dean and Tina had simply cut off contact with their families. There were even reports of a strange nomadic religious group returning the Clouds' car to Florida, deepening the mystery. The family's grassroots efforts to find Dean, Tina, and Holly went nowhere, and frustration mounted because what no one knew was that Dean and Tina were already dead, buried as nameless victims in an unmarked grave just outside of Houston in 2011, thanks to advances in forensic science. The Harris County Dew's bodies were exhumed for DNA testing. It wasn't until a decade later, in 2021, the forensic genealogist using the GEDmatch database finally cracked the case wide open. After 41 years, the Harris County Dews were identified as Harold Dean Claus Jr. and Tina Galen, CLA. I will remember that phone call for the rest of my life. She says, "I just want you to know that, we found him. He had been murdered." The revelation was bittersweet for their families after years of holding onto hope to the couple might still be alive. Their fears were confirmed. But amid the heartache, there was still one burning question. Where was baby Holly? Some speculated that her remains had been missed at the scene, or had she been taken by whoever killed her? Parents miraculously in 2022 after more than 4 decades of mystery. Holchley Marie was found alive in Oklahoma. This is the photo they gave to you. This was a face to a name, means the world, Chang my whole world. This little picture right here, she had no memory of her traumatic infancy and had been raised by an adoptive family, completely unaware of her true identity. Holly's discovery, at the age of 42, brought both closure and new questions, according to investigators. Holly had been left in an Arizona church by 2 barefoot women dressed in white robes, claiming to be part of a religious group, and the church unaware of the dark circumstances surrounding. Holly's abandonment ranged for her adoption for over 4 decades. Holly lived a life of normally completely removed from the horror that had taken her biological parents. Despite Holly being found, the murder case remains open and active, with investigators still piecing together the puzzle of who took Dean and Tina's lives and why. Moosehead, brewery's darkest secret. Richard Oland was born into privilege. The Oland were old money, one of Canada's wealthiest families, owners of the iconic Moosehead Brewery, the oldest independently owned brewery in the country on paper. Richard's life seemed perfect, was a successful businessman, married to Connie Olin for 46 years with 3 children, but his story was no fairy tale beneath the polished exterior. Well, things were far from ideal in the 1980s. A bitter sibling rivalry between Richard and his older brother Derek for control of Moose Head Breweries led to a family schism. Richard lost that battle and forced out of the family business. He started fresh founding his own successful companies. By 2011, he had amassed a fortune of nearly $37 million. But as the saying goes, more money, more problems. And when you're worth as much as Richard, you can easily get a target put on your back. On the morning of July 7, 2011, Richard Olin's lifeless body was found by his personal assistant Maureen Adamson faced down in his office, the place totally soaked in blood. This wasn't just a murder, was a savage, brutal attack, as Police Sergeant Mark Smith put it. "I've never seen anything like it. Was the worst crime scene in my career. I received a call requesting that we attend 52 Canterbury Street regarding a male not conscious, not breathing. The arrival was 8:56. Richard had been bludgeoned to death with 45 blows being delivered to his head, neck, and hands, offensive wound, showing he fought for his life. His spatter had soaked through the floor, the ceiling of the office below, but there was no murder weapon, no clear suspect at first with a crime like this. It seemed personal. Eventually, the police turned their attention to someone close to home. Richard's only son, Dennis Olin. Richard's youngest child soon found himself the center of the investigation. His relationship with his father had been strained with Richard, reportedly calling Dennis lazy and distant on the day of the murder. Dennis had visited his father's office for a brief meeting, and he was the last to see him alive. Ultimately, they found some microscopic bloodstains on one of Dennis's jackets. 4 of them that couldn't even be seen by the naked eye. That DNA showed it had come from Richard. But Dennis always maintained his innocence. That didn't matter much, though, and he was arrested. The first trial in 2015 was the longest and most expensive in New Brunswick's history. Over 65 days, intimate and disturbing details about the Olin family's private life were exposed, affairs, estrangements, deep-seated grudges. But the crux of the case rested on the forensics, those bloodstains on Dennis's jacket, and the timeline of events. We suggest that the accused was aware that he may have been seen on security cameras. He was aware that there was a chance the police would be looking for the clothing. That was the only DNA evidence in the case. So it's hugely significant. On December 19th of 2015, Dennis was then convicted of second-degree murder, as a result sentenced to life in prison. But apparently, system had gotten it wrong, because less than a year later, Dennis's conviction was overturned. The appeal court found that the jury had been misinstructed about key pieces of evidence, specifically some discrepancies in Dennis's statements about his clothing and what he had been wearing the day of the murder on July 19th of 2019. After a retrial by judge alone, Dennis Olin was then found not guilty. The retrial focused on new evidence, including witness testimonies about strange sounds and an unidentified man leaving the scene. But to this day, the mystery remains. As of right now, know who really killed Richard. The case of Christine Jessup, looking back, it was a stupid idea, but it was done as a means to protect a little girl that went on and backfired in the worst way it was. October 3rd of 1984 in Queensville, Ontario, when 9-year-old Christine Jessup was left home alone, as her mother and older brother left the day of visit, her father, who was in jail at the time. Christine was too young to see her dad behind bars or even see a detention facility. And so this was what was best. However, this would be the last time anyone would see Christine alive by that afternoon as they returned home from jail. Panic set in. Christine was declared missing once quiet. Tan turned into a frenzied search party. His neighbors, friends, and local authorities joined forces to look for the missing 9-year-old, 3 agonizing months. There was no sign of Christine. Then came New Year's Eve, several hundred volunteers, and police scoured a 30-square-meter area near Newmarket, north of Toronto. The search was massive. The whole town came out to hell on the last day of 1984. Christine Jessup's body was discovered in a desolate farmer's field in Sunderland, which was about 30 meters from her home. She had been brutally assaulted and stabbed to death. The grisly details of the crime demanded somebody be brought to justice. And so they got it. And Guy Paul Morin, who was a 23-year-old, quirky, soft-spoken neighbor who enjoyed playing the clarinet and keeping to himself, but in February of 1985, he was thrust in the spotlight of this investigation when Christine's own mother accused him of having an interest in her little girl. The once quiet neighbor was now the prime suspect. But was there any real evidence tying him to the crime? Well, not really, but they didn't have anyone else to look at. So the investigation was riddled with tunnel vision, a deadly combination of poor forensic science, witness misstatements, and rush conclusions. By 1986, Morin stood trial. For the first time, the jury, confused by a mountain of questionable evidence, acquitted him. But the Crown was satisfied. A second trial followed in 1992. 8 long years after Christine's murder, Guy Paul Morin was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life behind bars. But Morin's story was far from overgrowing wave of public support. Led by the Justice for Guy Paul Morin committee refused to allow him to sit there, as there was no real evidence, because, as it turns out, Morin didn't commit the crime. His fight for exoneration intensified, and in 1995, after 10 years of anguish, the truth came to light in the most definitive way possible. DNA evidence advancements and DNA testing conclusively prove what Morin had always maintained. He was innocent. It's wonderful. It's about time. I know I didn't do it. I did not kill Christine Jessup. It's as simple as that. And finally, I said, DNA has exonerated me 100% on January 23rd of 2018, 1995. He was then officially exonerated. This case would become a turning point in how Canadian law enforcement approach wrongful convictions. But still, for the Jess family, there was no answer as to who killed young Christine. And fast forward to 2020. With the advancements of genetic genealogy, new investigations were able to link DNA from the crime scene to a man named Calvin Hoover, a name buried in the original case files. A Hoover had been a friend of the Jessup family, someone Christine had trusted, and he knew the plans of the family the day he abducted her back in the day. Hoover had even helped in the search for Christine after her disappearance. He had hidden in plain sight, and chillingly, he had never even been questioned by police in 2015. Calvin died by choosing to leave this earth on his own and taking any secrets he held with him to the grave. So there were 5 disturbing and strange murder mysteries. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Hope you all have a great one out there. Stay safe. I'll see you soon.